Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to P6 icons or app icons that we're going to work on. And we're going to work on a whole sheet of icons. And what I'm going to do right now is just go through a sample icon just to show some techniques in Illustrator that you can use for the backdrop for your icons. Now, we only have two kinds here. We have a circle, which will be created with the oval tool, and we have a kind of round-cornered square that we're going to work on. And I'll show you the round-cornered square, and I'll show you a technique for doing that. Now, on the sample icon sheet that I gave you, or the file that you can download, it'll say start with a 1x1 rectangle with a 0.22 corner radius. Now, if you use the round cornered rectangle tool, here's the round cornered rectangle tool. If you use that, now you could put in those numbers, but if you were creating one on your own, it'd be really hard to see what this is. I never liked using this round cornered rectangle tool because it's like hit or miss. You have to kind of, I could put in one, and then, I don't know how much that is until I actually see it. And that looks okay, but it's kind of hit or miss, and it's based on how big you make the rectangle at the time. So I don't like using that. I like to see some kind of preview when I make round corners on my rectangle. So I don't like using that tool. It's good once in a while, but if you want to really kind of get a good look of what your shape is going to look like ahead of time, there's another method to use this. So I'm going to start with just a regular rectangle tool. And I am going to click on my page and make a 1x1 rectangle. So it's 1x1, and I'll hit OK. So you just have to click once, and you'll get this option to put in a number. And actually, let me do that again, just so you remember, because we haven't done this since Computer Graphics 1. When you select this tool, instead of clicking and dragging, if you just click on your page, you could put in a number, and that's what I'll do. So there's my 1 inch by 1 inch rectangle. Now, already it has a gradient on it. Now, that's just because I was messing around with this ahead of time, but we are going to put a gradient on this. But before I do this, what I want to do is put a round corner rectangle, or put round corners on it, I should say. So if you go to Effect, Stylize, and go over and go down to round cornered rectangles, it's kind of it's a temporary effect that you're going to put on. But it works, and you have a little preview there. So I actually have the 0.22 on there right now. So you can go up and put more on here. You could go down and put less. So I mentioned putting 0.22. Actually, 0.20 probably looks better for this kind of icon here. But since I have 0.22, I'll stick with that for now. So that's our 0.22, and you can keep reapplying the preview on here. You could check it and uncheck it just to make it reset. So that's an easy way to do it. So that's one way to make a round corner rectangle. One thing I want to point out, though, and I'll zoom into this just to show you, is that even though it looks like a round corner rectangle, it really isn't. If I go into View Outline, you could see it still has the regular square path with anchor points at each corner. If I click on this with my direct selection tool, you can see there's anchor points just at the corners like a regular square. So this is not really a round cornered rectangle, it just has an effect on it. If you go to your appearance palette, you'll see the round cornered effect on there. And you could click on here and change it. If you want to make it less or more, you could do that, and I'll cancel out of that. And you could even delete your effect if you didn't want the effect. You could just click the trash can in here and get rid of it. But what I'm pointing out here is that this is temporary. And how does that matter? Well, we are going to use this tool, the knife tool, a little later. But let's say I would knife through this shape. I'd select this shape, and I'd use my knife tool, and I'd cut through it, which is a technique we'll use to kind of slice two shapes apart. If I do that, you can see it makes this weird effect, and I always see people having this happen to them, and it's because they forgot to do something that we have to do with an appearance, and it's expand appearance. So let me undo this now, and one thing I just want to show you is that after you do an effect and you're okay with it, you're okay with the round corner, you know it's going to be 0.22, what you want to do if you're going to be doing anything else with this shape is you want to go to Object, Expand Appearance, and what that does is it makes the appearance that's in the appearance palette permanent. So I'm going to do Expand Appearance, and what that actually does, if I go in View Outline, you can see it actually put anchor points here. I'll click on this shape here. Now they're showing up in green. It's kind of hard to see, but it actually made anchor points. So there's anchor points with curved line segments between these. So it kind of made it permanent now. So that's actually what we want. So if you use an appearance like that, like round corners, just remember to expand it or do expand appearance afterwards so that it's now permanent. So the next step we're going to do with this thing is we're actually gonna put a gradient on it, and we're going to do a gradient. Let me zoom back over here. We're going to do a gradient like this one. Let me move this thing here. This is just a semi-transparent little shape that we're going to create, but and I'll move this and this, and you can see we have a gradient here which is kind of an orange and then kind of a lighter orange. It's not really orange to white, it's not necessarily orange to yellow either, but it's kind of a shade of it. So we want to use subtle gradient shapes on here. So that's what we're going to do. I'll undo those two things that I did and put it back the way it was. So we're going to use a subtle gradient, and I'll just review some of the gradient tools here. Now this one is already applied, and typically when you go to your gradient palette over here, the first gradient you'll see will typically be this one, kind of a black and white gradient. Now it's linear right now, meaning it's doing it in line fashion. We want to change it to radial, which makes it black on the outside and white in the center. And what we'll do, just for this sample, we'll make it like a purple color. So I'll double click here and I'll bring up a purple color. I'll go down to where the swatches icon is and I'll do the second purple. It's a little more plummy than the first purple, and I'll use that. Now right now it's kind of that purple to white. Now what I'm also going to do is go over to this color. Now one thing I could do is I could double click on this and use the same purple color, and then I could turn down the opacity. If I wanted it to be see-through, I can actually make it be see-through. Which is what, I could use it white, but I could also do that. So that's one method, but what I'm actually going to do, I don't want it see-through right now, is I'm going to put it back to 100% opacity, is I'm just going to edit this color and make it a little lighter. Now, I could have picked any other color, but what I'm going to do after picking this color is go to this paint, this little paint palette here. Instead of trying to adjust the RGB, which can be kind of confusing in terms of trying to lighten a particular color, is I'm going to go to this little option area up here. And you could do this with anytime with the color palette. And I'm going to put it in Hsb mode, which is hue, saturation, and brightness. Brightness will make it darker. Saturation will take away the color away. So, and the brightness can also make it lighter too. So I'm actually going to brighten it up a little bit and desaturate it a little and just make a little bit brighter version of the color. That way it kind of stays in the same color family, and you could get a kind of a subtle adjustment of the original color without trying to find a different color that may not even be in the same color family. So by adjusting these a little bit, I'll make a little bit lighter version in the middle. Now one thing you could do as well, after doing that, you could use the gradient tool. Now remember, the gradient tool, when you can actually kind of like change where the center point is. You can kind of change where the highlight is. You could make it in the bottom, you could make it in the center, you could make it shorter. You can make a shorter one, you can make a bigger one with that. I usually like doing it the old way with, kind of clicking and dragging. So maybe I'll just move it off center a little bit. So you could try doing that. And that looks okay. Because we're going to put a little highlight up here. So there's a kind of a highlight down there and a highlight up here. So I'll see how that looks. But again, we just use the same color on the gradient and just lighten this one by using the hue, saturation, brightness slider once we went in there. And again, we had to get in there by using the color palette, not the swatches. Okay, so that's our gradient. Now I'm also going to put kind of a gray stroke on here. So I'm going to click on here and just choose like I could choose black and I could tint it down, or I could just choose a gray from here. I'll choose gray and I'll just make it a little bit thicker, like maybe a 2-point stroke for now. So that's kind of what I want for my icon. Now I also want that little glossy look in the middle. So what I'm going to do to that is take this shape and you know what, one more thing, let me just mention here that this is new with some of the newer versions of Illustrator. You couldn't do this in the past, that when you put a stroke on here, you do have the ability to put the stroke on the, you see how the stroke, if I zoom in on here, you could see how it kind of straddles, the stroke itself straddles the path. If I'd actually go into outline, that's actually where the path is, so it kind of straddles that. And sometimes that has an effect, sometimes it doesn't. But I just want to point out that you can align the stroke on the inside or on the outside of the path. So you do have the ability to do that, so I just wanted to point that out. There may be a time when that may be necessary, but I'll just put it back where it was on the center for now.